Okay. If you cannot put it in the comment box, and we will see what we can troubleshoot it. But hopefully everyone can see that because I am sharing my screen. All right.
So Darren wrote that he can't see it, and I can't see it either.
You
And
cannot see it. It's your probably something is hiding it on your screen.
Yeah, it should be right next to the GoToMeeting control panel, just to
Yes,
the
it's
left of
right
it.
there, right next to the panel.
Are you clicking on the little yellow logo, the GoToMeeting logo at the bottom of your panel? It says, because the slide says Fielding Graduate University, Trust and Virtual Teamwork.
Right, exactly.
But in order to see it, I had to click on the GoToMeeting logo, which is like a jack.
Right. And depending upon the computer system you're using, you can also go up top to the menu bar where it says View. Okay. Your view should be on. Okay. So you should be able to see that.
It's Heather here. I could see Elena's earlier, but I can't see any slides now.
Oh, do you still see my screen? Maybe I can.
So I'll tell you what's happening. You're sharing your screen. You have to stop sharing your screen there. So just go up top where it says sharing, stop sharing screen. That's the button you got to hit.
It's inactive. Sorry, maybe Anil, you can
Oh,
remove from.
Darren, we've now got you instead of the slides. What did you do?
So somebody's clicked on sharing screen. You guys have to hit stop sharing screen.
Okay, now it's working because I was a presenter. Now you're a presenter, Anil. It does work for me. Does it work for everyone else?
Okay.
Yes, I can see it.
Not yet.
No.
Okay, now can you see my screen now, all of you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we're in business then. All right. All right. So Yelena, let me answer your question to the best of my, ability. It's clearly a very, very vast area of knowledge, expertise, what have you. I started getting really engaged with the idea of virtuality and virtual teamwork back in the mid 90s when the internet was just getting or folks were just getting access to the internet for email and such, because as you well know, it became publicly available somewhere in the mid 90s, and I was one of the earlier entrants into the field of cyberspace. So I started engaging very, very actively right around the 1998 to 2000, that time frame. What attracted me most was the fact that I could be sitting in my office, even looking outside my window, looking at this beautiful maple tree, all the shrubbery around my home and my office, and yet be able to interact with people from literally around the world via just an internet connection. To me, that was an astounding, incredible notion that you could bring together so many thoughts, ideas, feelings, emotions, and different wisdom from different parts of the world, multiculturally. To me, that was very, very fascinating. That was one. Two, then having done a tremendous amount of face-to-face work, mostly in small to medium-sized group settings, I was very intrigued with the notion of the similarities and differences between meeting face to face and meeting virtually. Okay. So clearly, as we progress through the next 45 to 50 minutes, you'll see that there are some distinct differences and some very subtle similarities between the two formats. We're so used to working in the real world. When I say the real world, this is not that this is any less real, but let's for a moment think of this as a little bit different from the real world. In the real world, you could be sitting across, we could all be sitting across a desk, across a conference room table, and discussing different things. But when you're into the field of virtuality, a new dynamic starts to unfold. So I was very, very curious about how this dynamic impacts and is impacted by virtuality. With that said, I just want us to progress to our slide number 1, and I want you to just take a look at that and see what gets stirred up for you. Okay, just give me a second here. All right, so just look at this slide and think of this as trust and teamwork. Okay. Can you all see the slide with all these folks in silhouettes?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So just look at this slide, reflect on it for a moment, and see what gets stirred up for you when you think of trust and teamwork. I'll give you a couple of moments to just take this in. All right, so let me progress to the next slide, and now take a look at this slide and think of the same trust and teamwork and see what stirs up for you. Again, this was 1, this is 2. 1, 2. So let's pause for a second here and reflect on those 2 slides. And at this point, just don't think about the virtuality aspect, just think about the team aspect, all right? Trust and teamwork.
Just one comment from me. It's down here. Can you hear me, Anil? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I would say that if I was in the first picture, if I was taking part, I think I could definitely hide there. I think because nobody can really see my face. There's quite a few other people that look quite like me, and I think I wouldn't need to play too much of a part. If I was kind of doing something else or I wasn't completely connected with it, I think I don't think I'd be noticed too much. I think I can get away with it. Whereas in the second slide, if you skip to the second one, you know, I'm really there, aren't I? I mean, I have to be on the tip of my toes in that situation. I need to be very engaged, and I'm dealing with humans who can check in with me and work out where I am as a human as well.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's very it's much more intense and here and now than the first one, which feels like it's nowhere in particular.
Anyone else? Thanks, Darren.
I think just building on that, the first one seems a bit, although people seem to be quite relaxed, it's a bit kind of, well, a bit sort of monochrome and a bit bleak looking in a way. Whereas the second one seems, you know, you've got that sort of proximity of other people, their inner circle, their, you know, you feel a bit more that there's a collaboration between people, whereas in the first one there's a line of people that are kind of together but not together.
And this is exactly what I wanted to say as well. The first image for me, on the first image I see individuals, where the second image for me represents a group that consists of individuals.
Interesting.
Can I throw something in from a slightly different direction?
Go right ahead.
I think I think your viewpoint is different for the two groups. So the first one, you're looking into the group, and the second one, you're looking up at a bunch of individuals. And I think that probably has quite, your viewpoint, I think, impacts how you feel about the two groups.
Right.
So to me, my instinct that the second one is more of a team to some extent is because I'm seeing them as a group. The first one, I'm seeing a bunch of individuals. And I'm seeing them from below, so they kind of look down on me.
So would it be fair to say that the first one, you're not necessarily seeing it as a group per se, while the second one,
it could,
you're seeing it more like a group?
That's the immediate visual perception. I have to say I've worked in both kind of groups, and I think the reality could be quite different in both cases, but
Sure.
Visually, that's how it would seem to me.
Great, thanks. Anyone else wants to take a stab at this?
It's Kami here. I was going to say on image one, it feels like a caricature of real people, and image two obviously is real people. So it's kind of image one seems to be representative of what we imagine certain types of people to look like, whereas this looks like actual people, and therefore you're not having to project anything into them.
Would you say that the second picture looks more human?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And Nigel's come forward with a comment, I see.
Yeah, Nigel, I think try speaking now. Nigel, I think your microphone. Oh wait, now it's unmuted. Why don't you try to talk now? Let's see what happens. Okay, clearly there's an issue with the microphone. It may be with the settings of your computer, not necessarily with the system here. Okay, so I feel like the one looking down on the group at the table. Okay, all right. So Nigel says, without my microphone working, sorry, I feel like I'm the one looking down on the group at the table. All right. And the previous picture was you're looking straight at them. There's a linearity there. And the second one, if you see, there's a circularity there. Okay. And so what does that imply to you when you think of teamwork and intimacy in a group and relatedness in a group?
To me, it's a bit like if you go to a restaurant, I always prefer a table that's a round table than a long table.
Right.
Because somehow it just encourages everybody to talk to one another and everybody to be involved. And obviously when you have a line, it's just harder to do that. It's just harder to have that same degree of collaboration and contact, I think.
In the two pictures, did anyone notice anything about body language?
Well, the first body language is very kind of individual, quite confrontational, quite defensive. For some of them, folded arms. Others are a bit more open. The second one is very collegiate. It's very collaborative. But that's also reflecting that in the second one, we're seeing people doing something. Whereas in the first one, people are really just standing. So it's difficult to envisage what the team might be doing either based on trust or to build trust.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the second one, you're able to make an assumption.
Mm-hmm.
There is a collaboration. In fact, they could all be working on entirely different pieces of paper, but somehow the picture looks like they are all collaborating because.
Right. Elena,
Yes, I
go
just
ahead.
wanted to.
Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
liked. Yes, can you hear me? I liked very much your question about that the first one is we can see linearity and the second one is about circularity. Well, for me, it implies linearity implies that there is a hierarchy.
Yep.
So there is one standing in the first, second, third, etc. position. When circularity for me, it's a flat environment where you can't really see, at least visually. And as you said, I think, Ashley, your comment was very close to what I'm saying right now, that you can engage easier in a circular environment because it's flat and the hierarchy is not that visible.
Right. That's a really, really interesting aspect that I hadn't thought of, the hierarchy. Okay. Does everybody think that in the second scenario that is tends to be, and just on the face of it, looks more non-hierarchical, okay, more equitable, more collaborative? You see how people are leaning in, and they may well be because the camera has taken a shot from the top, so everybody looks like they're leaning in. But when you're leaning in, something absolutely magical happens in a group. And I mean it metaphorically also.
I guess, Darren here, Anil, that have to be careful about assumptions as well, because that chap in the black suit, I mean, we don't know what he's saying to
Yeah.
the person opposite him, and actually, you could also lean in when you're quite tense and stressed and trying to prepare yourself to fight. So I don't think that because they're on a round table and they're human necessarily means it's a comfortable place to be.
Excellent point. And we all see the world as we are, not as the way the world is, right? To some extent. To some extent. Does anyone else would like to share anything on that?
The first one, they all look more remote from one another.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just as an observation, the body language isn't related to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So neither are they're neither doing anything together, nor is the body language helping. So there's no suggestion of any trust or indeed any teamwork going on, really. But if they were listening to one another, obviously, if the body language was looking like they were listening, I'm not sure we'd have such a contrast between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I suppose just maybe building on Darren's point a little bit, the leaning in the second picture seems to imply some involvement. It may, as Darren said, we don't know what that involvement is. It could even be a confrontational involvement, but it is involvement. You know, they are involved with each other in some way, whereas in the first one they don't seem involved with each other. They seem to be, you know, each striking their own pose, each in their own little bubble in a way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does the fact that the first picture is dark, more shadowy, have anything to do with how we perceive it? What if these folks were all colorized, that they weren't black and white? Do you think that would have made a difference?
I know I don't have the answer to that one, but I was feeling slightly rebellious that we're being too nice about the second photo and not nice about the first. So I'm gonna talk up the first. So in the first, I see very confident people. They're all individuals. They all have their own vision. They're standing there. They're getting ready to go. You can see there's, they don't have to lean forward on the table. They're straight, by themselves. That they've got a vision, a personal vision of the future. And I think there's a lot of power in number one. And I think there could be incredible power if someone or something could bring these individuals, these people with individual vision together. Whereas in the second picture, they're all too embroiled with each other, and their views are all mixed and matched, and they're trying desperately to take on each different people's opinions in a very tense, busy meeting, and have lost touch with their individual beliefs.
Interesting.
There we go. I couldn't resist it.
All right. Hey, don't resist it. Just let it all hang out. As to say. That's the name of the game. Yeah. So, does anybody else want to add before we move to the next piece?
Let's move. Let's see what's next.
Okay.
Sorry,
All right.
Can I just make one
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it's interesting that after a while, when you look at the photos, we start to make up our own story about them. Observation. Actually, we've moved quite a long way from observation to putting ourselves in the two groups and actually making up our own interpretation of actually what's going on, which may or may not be what is going on. But we're no longer just observing.
Yeah.
All right. Great. All right. So let's go to the next slide. It's a very basic slide. What is trust? And of course, it is not without being too simplistic about it. I mean, it's really just one very rudimentary definition of trust. Would anyone like to add anything to that? From your own how you would define trust?
I would argue it's more active than that. It feels a bit abstract. So if we're talking about trusting in someone, for me, trust is trusting that they will do something when required. Which I'm not saying isn't in the definition, but something quite active about trust. For me, personally, may not be true for everybody.
Heather, I can see it's kind of trust in order to do what, isn't it? It's part of an action sequence. Is that your thought?
Yes. That for me is what trust is. Trust is not. You can define trust as an abstract concept, but it has no meaning until it becomes something which underpins an action.
I like that. Anil, I was going to add as well that the something bit would be quite important to me, because I think I trust my wife, and I would define that trust in a different way that I would trust John Lewis. I definitely would have two different definitions.
I'm not very comfortable. I'm not sure why, but I'm not very comfortable with the word dependability. Does it mean that I depend on someone I trust or something I trust? Whether it is always the case, because I don't know, somehow for me dependability has a very negative connotation, that I continue without this, or it depends somehow on this, whether trust can be perceived without this element.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
Anil, just notice Nigel's comments in the box.
Okay. A colleague of mine trusts people to be the way he experiences them to be, and when they behave differently, he trusts them as they have shown themselves to be, and so on. Okay. To be the way he experiences them to be. Okay. All right. So, did everybody read Nigel's comment? Does anyone want to reflect on that? I think he brings up a really good point there.
I think it's a build on the action point.
Mm-hmm.
That trust is just not abstract. Trust is built on and depends on an active relationship. That experience is what builds trust. That's how I would build on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thanks, Nigel.
Mm-hmm. Very, very, very nice point about
So
the
you're only
experience. Experience.
you're only as trustworthy as your last experience. In a
Mm-hmm.
way.
Mm-hmm. That's very, very interesting.
Heather, Heather, that connects to what you were saying. So if you're defining trust as a kind of a basis for an action, and Nigel's saying that your trust is formed by your experience of an action. So there's kind of action in between. There's action either side of the trust. It's like a trust sandwich.
Yes, and if you think of a brand that you thought you trusted, Nigel's point about our experience is suddenly very different. If a brand implies that you are going to experience A, and you actually experience B, you are more disappointed than if you hadn't expected experience A, I think. And so trust can change how you view an experience, both before the trust you had before and the trust after. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm losing you a bit, Heather, there. Couldn't hear the last bit.
I think it is that trust sandwich, but trust can be changed by the experience. And if what you experience does not stack up with what you trusted would happen, you can be more disappointed than if you never felt the trust to start with. And that's true of brands particularly. Again, I'm picking up on the point about people are different from things. I'm not sure it's quite the same with people. I think people we really trust, perhaps we have more tolerance around different experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And that reminds me of a situation where someone that I was trying to interact with that was referred to me by someone else, and that someone knew that person remotely, and I got to talking. I got myself into a triangulation, and I sort of like I said, before I go any further into a more collegial relationship with this individual, I just wanted to get your feel, because you're both my colleagues. And the one colleague said, "Go right ahead, man. I've had some wonderful experiences with this person." While the other person said to me, be a little leery about how much of yourself you want to give to this relationship, blah, blah, blah. I really haven't had the best of experiences with this person. And my take on that was, yes, I hear you both, but I would like to go by my own experience of the person, negative or positive. And
Sorry.
but I do have to admit that when people give you that kind of feedback, it does color your perception a bit. How can it not? when someone that is very close to you, that you've developed a level of trust and confidence with, tells you, hey, just be careful, be cautious. All right, guard yourself. Don't give too much of your trust to this individual yet before you really are able to get a feel for this person. Um, so the experience that we're talking about is, I think, is a very, very important point in trust building. It is the experience, how you experience people. And Yelena, to your point, I take note of your point about the dependability aspect. Um, my own personal take on that is that if I can trust someone to do something, um, I am in a sense also depending on that person to do what that person says he or she will do. So in that sense, I would see it as part of trust. And again, you can certainly have a different idea about that, and I respect that. I'd like to hear from the others about this aspect about dependability.
I'm trying to think whether if I replace dependability with accountability,
Uh-huh.
whether I would feel happier.
Mhm.
So it's not that what they do is always predictable.
Mhm.
I'm focusing here on someone rather than something, but I'm not sure it's that it's dependable as in it will always be predictable, but that they will always be accountable for doing something.
Okay.
Does it mean that, if I understood your point correctly, does it mean that trust ties people together in a way that I'm accountable of my action because you trust me and I trust you? So I need to take this into account whatever I do. So this link and this tie that is created based on trust between people. Are you talking about this? And maybe dependability is about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. If you can trust me and I can trust you, um, I'm comfortable, and I realize others are not with the notion of dependability, but for me, dependability is a very, very critical factor in all my professional dealings. If I cannot depend on someone who says, hey, you know what, I'm going to do this, all right, don't worry, I'll take care of it. Or to the contrary, let me know if the person is having an issue and is unable to deliver. I would like that person to tell me rather than me put myself in a guessing game, and I'm in a void trying to understand what's going on. I'm projecting all my anxieties into this silence or whatever. Uh, so for me personally, dependability is a very, very integral part of trust.
I guess, Anil, you're not answering the question that's there, but a different question. You're answering the question, why trust?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I guess, a different question. I wonder whether, is trust there whether you like it or not, or do you have a choice to the extent to which you trust?
Uh-huh. And on that, let's move to the next slide.
Can we just make sure we're picking up Nigel's
Oh,
point?
sure. Oh, go ahead.
Nigel's put, or if I cannot depend on you being the person that I thought you were or would be.
Mm-hmm.
So this is bringing into the dependability equation the fact that the dependence sets up an expectation about the person, if I've got that correct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Good point.
You got it.
Yes.
Nigel gives a thumbs up.
You got a yes, you got a thumbs up. Is what binds
That
us
was a really interesting question.
is what binds us together a common set of assumptions about something. Wonderful. And you almost, Nigel, you almost have read my mind, because in the following slide we're going to be talking about that aspect of what is that something that holds us together, or holds the a common set of assumptions about something together, or binds us together. So let's move on to the next slide. Why is trust so fragile and multifaceted?
I've got a related question. I don't know if it's a comment. Is trust always mutual?
Good point.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fascinating question. Why is it so fragile and multifaceted? Is it our fragility as human beings that make it fragile? I mean, we are inherently a little bit unpredictable, and the whole thing about trust is, although I know you were saying, Heather, it's not about predictability, it is at least potentially about reliability, about something you can hold on to. You sort of think, I really trust that person. That's something, something I can rely on, depend on, something solid in this tricky world. But ultimately, we're all a bit fragile, and we are all a bit flaky.
Yeah. Is it
So
why?
maybe
Why is
that's why
it?
trust is.
Why is it so ephemeral, so fleeting? I guess where I'm going with that.
Is that not because we are quite ephemeral and quite fleeting?
Yeah.
It's kind of like,
Like
That's
that.
what I was trying to say, Kami. Yeah.
I mean, it's the kind of, because it was interesting listening, because thinking through my experiences, it seems that trust was A, passive, and B, always there. And even when it was kind of what we might describe as breaking trust, the search was to try and find meaning in why we felt the trust was broken, as opposed to, trying to, it's always been in those shades of grades rather than trying to classify it as black and white. Does that make sense? So, it's kind of like, do we have it? Yes, no, as opposed to kind of going, well, what shade of what we think we have do we have together?
Right. Right. And a picture comes to my mind between two scenarios. I can sit with someone and have a conversation in a park bench, all right, and be totally comfortable with that person, trust that person enough to be able to engage me and have that person engaged. But maybe there's something missing. I may not be able to invite that person to my home for dinner with my family. That requires a different kind of trust there too.
Absolutely.
Nigel's throwing in some interesting comments here.
Yes, if I'm always pretending, then I might trust that you're pretending too. Okay. Mm-hmm.
But is trust really that fragile? Are there people who you do trust implicitly? Sorry, I can't remember who said their wife earlier, but would you always trust your wife more than, say, you would always trust somebody else at work, perhaps? Are there kinds of trust or kinds of relationships that breed stronger kinds of trust?
Good question.
Do you trust somebody the same for everything, or do you trust somebody? Because I know, particularly in a work environment, that there are people you would trust to do activity A, and you wouldn't trust them to do activity B. So it's not, you trust the person, but for a given set of things. And there are other people who I would say I trust absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
So is
I
it relative
suppose
and absolute?
it can apply in lots of different scenarios, can't it? Because you might be trusting you might trust somebody to do things, but you might not feel you trust them enough to share some particular kinds of information with. So those are two slightly different things, aren't they? So you trust them for some things, but you don't trust them for others.
I was thinking also of the speed that you might need to build up trust in certain situations. If you are working in this virtual world and your team is put together, from one day to the next, you're suddenly with these other people. Do you trust them? Don't you trust them? The pace is very fast, and you need to kind of work out to what extent you can trust and look out for indicators, things that might build up your trust or not, and perhaps that's more difficult in the virtual world. I was just looking at the little text box there, Heather's comment about different types of trust. I think that interests me because you have different types of relationships, and maybe you bring only part of yourself to certain places, and therefore you trust in different ways. That's a very nice point, Heather, about different types of trust depending on what you kind of bring to the table.
Yes, and also how you built a relationship. I'm thinking of virtual teams where you may never have, Yelena, you were saying earlier, about never meeting somebody. And does it take you longer? Is it a different kind of trust when you haven't met somebody, or is it about working with them? And therefore, does the fact, if the work is successful, does it matter whether it was a virtual piece of work or an offline piece of work?
A real challenge there, Heather, isn't it? Anil, I see you've got these cues, these indicators that you pick up. I guess if you're face to face, they're very easy to spot.
Yes.
And less easy to spot if you're, as we are now.
Right. Right. Go ahead.
Well, I was just seeing Nigel. Sorry. Go on, Heather. You go.
I was just going to ask: is it 70% of communication comes from body language?
93 non-verbal, I think.
Okay. Yes. I think some of the non-verbal can come. I don't know about all of it, but that's an enormous percentage.
Yes, it is.
We would rely on.
Do you trust that I've got the right answer on that, though?
Oh, well, I'll go and Google it.
Right.
But I guess Nigel's asked a good question here. So we haven't met. It's probably unlikelier for us to share our deepest feelings right here than someone we've met. But I guess, Nigel, so what? Do you have to share your deepest feelings in order to build trust?
Great point.
I'm waiting for Nigel fingers on his keys.
That brings you down to different types of trust, doesn't it? Maybe trusting somebody to complete an action might be different from trusting somebody with personal information of your own.
But is there something here about being able to articulate and express what we feel inside in a way where we are comfortable? And that's a kind of constant dilemma we face of wanting to express ideas, but maybe not being able to find a way of doing that represents the emotions that we feel inside, and therefore you get that issue of, well, how easy is it to express ourselves? Not repressing, but more like clarity of meaning in what we want to get over in order that somebody understands what we feel.
I think, building on that, I'm back to trust being something that's action oriented. Because I think there are things you might do as a team where if you have a clear understanding of the outcome you're trying to reach, providing it looks like everybody is contributing something which is relevant to that action, whether or not that is deeply emotional or is kind of less the point. It's more about relevance for me in that kind of context.
How do you mean? Sorry, Heather.
Well, the clarity, I get the point about clarity, but let's take this conversation where I would argue that the outcome we're all seeking, we all think we've got in common, is to understand how virtual teams can build trust and work better together. That may or may not be a good paraphrase, but let's start with that. If actually somebody started to talk about how they were building their personal knowledge base, I would be sitting here thinking, well, what's the relevance of that to virtual teamwork? So for me, the trust bit, and I would therefore start to distrust that that person was really contributing to the conversation. It may be that they have a really relevant point about personal information that is vital to trust and virtual teamwork, but because I haven't got the relevance of that to the outcome I think we're all trying to achieve, I start to distrust. And it may just be a communication issue.
Mm. And maybe that communication issue is from within or with, it's either from the person trying to express themselves or the person trying to understand.
Yes, it could be on either side. It could be a transmission. It could be a transmission or a reception issue.
Yeah. Which is amazing when you think how many ways we have of expressing that. But then but in other ways we're limited as well. The kind of infinite ideas that we have in our head, and then the relatively limited vocabulary or set of ways that we're able to express them. Not just in all kind of things. The caricature of our behaviours, or the physical language we use, or the idea sets that we're allowed to confine ourselves to. It becomes, relatively simple compared to what is complexity in our heads. But a complexity we're all really comfortable with, because it's kind of happened to all of us, happens to every single one of us. If that makes sense.
Yes, I would agree with you. But I have a theory that we have even more problems on the reception side. So if the person transmitting the information, making the communication, has trouble taking everything that's in their head and clarifying that into something that's easily understood, I think most people are not ready to receive.
Yeah.
I think they have preconceived notions about what they're going to receive.
Absolutely.
And some of the cues that tell you you're not going to hear that are in those physical gestures and things.
Yeah.
Thank you, Nigel. That's very kind.
Very, very interesting. See, here's an example of how a gesture such as that, even though it's in chat and in virtuality, can start to build that foundation of trust between two people. Very interesting indeed.
This is a great social experiment in trust, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, yeah.
Ah, see, it only took me 56 minutes to work it out, but now I see. That's why you're a doctor and I'm a mister.
And that doesn't matter at all.
Oh.
um, let's just go through these couple of points here and see if anybody has anything to add to this before we move on. I'm just being mindful of the watch here. I believe, Yelena, correct me if I'm wrong, that we are here for uh, about an hour or so, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes. I'm sure everyone would like to continue, but we will have to finish like in 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, good. So with that, let me just go into this thing that I believe Heather had brought up. So what is it that happens in virtuality in hastily formed groups, and we see them all around us all the time? All right, groups that form really quickly, even such as this one, forming really quickly for a purpose to discuss trust in virtual teamwork, right? So, what is it that happens? And there's a concept that, of course, you can read up on that. I can also send you a wonderful paper that was written by Clara Popa, Dr. Clara Popa, on the topic of swift trust and basic assumptions in virtual teams. But if we just read the swift trust is a unique form of collective perception and relating that is capable of managing issues of vulnerability, uncertainty, risk, and expectations. I think it's a very powerful construct when you think of uh, temporary groups and teams.
Can I ask how you would distinguish swift trust from any other kind of trust?
All right, so when you say any other kind of trust, meaning what other kind of trust?
Well, trust that exists, for example, in a long-term relationship.
Okay.
What
Okay.
is it that
All right.
distinguishes swift trust?
All right. So swift trust would be, let's say a team forms, an ad hoc team forms, and we're there for a certain purpose or for just a short duration. We have a task in front of us. We know who the team members are, but we've never seen these folks. Okay. They may be across the world, across the globe. And so we have the task. We know who the team members are. The boundaries have been articulated. Everything is set out. The stage has been set to do the work. So what is it that happens in that? When there's, assuming there's a team lead, what is it that must happen for team members? Uh, what do they have to invest in? All right, for that work to happen. Because hey, if you look at uh, all the other the concepts around group work and cohesiveness and building and teamwork, you'll see that trust is, well, it takes a while to develop. It's not something that's magical. All right, it's a series of small transactions. It's very fragile. It can come down like a house of cards, but it takes a long time to build and develop. So why then is this concept of swift trust so germane to temporary groups? Because in a temporary group, something really quickly happens. Something gets underway for the team to start working together. Now, I'm not even talking about all of us working for a corporation. We are getting paid a salary, so we are obviously obligated to do the work, for want of a better expression. But I'm even talking about a group such as this. I mean, there's a certain amount of trust and reliability and dependability and a little intimacy that starts to form. This is the first time we're meeting, and many of us are never going to probably end up meeting face to face. So if you just look at, let's not go out there far. If you look at just our own setting, and I'm not sure how many of you have actually met face to face with each other, but that's not even the important point. So given that scenario, how is it that we can meet and talk about something so sensitive such as trust? So what is it, if you look at this group or temporary team or whatever, discussing this concept and think of swift trust, what is that swift trust that happened? What is the identificatory glue that took hold here for us to be able to do this work for 60 minutes together? And it's a complex question, so obviously a very involved question. And I'll be happy to send you that very, very revealing paper on Swift Trust in virtual teamwork. I'll send it to Yelena, and Yelena can forward it to your email addresses. Would you be comfortable with that, Yelena?
Sure, definitely.
Okay, great. Because I'd love for you to read up a little bit on that and form your own ideas and thoughts.
And it's been really interesting experiencing the topic rather than talking about it. I've really appreciated that.
Thank you.
And Anil, thank you very much. And let me return to my initial question that I asked in the very beginning of this discussion.
Yes.
And just because I have an answer, my own explanation why we built trust between yourself and myself. And I think in our case, it was our interest to explore certain topics, and maybe it is applicable for this specific group because there are curious individuals who decided to get together to spend an hour to talk about a topic they are interested in and want to learn more about it. So right. I guess we were talking about action, and I hope action will follow, maybe not straight away, but at least this ideas that we exchange and some stimulating thoughts that we discussed here. I think this is something that connected us here today.
Great. And just to piggyback on your thought, I do want to share with the group that we had a sidebar conversation, Yelena and I, and about whether or not we should mute everyone on arrival or shall we keep everybody unmuted. And of course, Yelena came at me and said, Anil, and rather assertively, if I might add, hey, Anil, Yelena said, Anil, it's all going to be okay. All right? Don't worry about it. We've got conscious people joining the group. They're very responsible. Believe me, they will unmute themselves if there are background noises. Now, having done this hundreds and hundreds of times and become almost like a robot doing this, I had my own thoughts and perceptions. But then I said, you know what? I trust Yelena, and I will go with what Yelena suggests, only with one caveat. And I wrote that to Yelena. I said, if we start to get background noises, we'll just have to unmute everyone with the understanding that we're doing it for the sake of getting a good recording. All right. So it's not that we're singling anybody out. And so there's that trust that formed between Yelena and I. And even for me to do this work today is in large part because of the trust that is developed between Yelena and myself, that I can rely on Yelena. I'll use my own term, even depend on Yelena for doing something that she said she would do. All right. So there's an example of that right there.
Thank you. And thanks everyone who took part in this, and thank you for your comments. And as Anil said, this conversation has been recorded, so everyone who is interested to listen again and again, because I think it will be worthwhile listening again. At least I will do it myself, because there are some interesting ideas that we started to explore here.
And this is just the beginning, Yelena. I would encourage everyone to go through that Swift Trust document. I think you're going to come away learning a lot more in depth about the topic of Swift Trust and virtual teamwork. Okay? So I do want to thank you all for your time and your contribution to this endeavor. We will create a recording, and I'll send the recording out to Yelena, and she can forward this out to you guys. We'll also upload the recording to YouTube. Okay? So others can also understand this and go with that. All right?
Thank you very much.
All right, Yelena, thank you so much. Take good care and have a great day all. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.